Hello, my name is Rachel. I'm 65 years old, and I want to tell you something that changed my life forever. One sunny afternoon, I came home for lunch, and I noticed my dog, Rusty, acting strangely restless. He wouldn't stop pacing and whining, and a strange feeling settled in my stomach. That's when I realized the unthinkable. My husband was in the jacuzzi with the neighbor. Shock and disbelief hit me all at once. My heart was pounding, but I acted fast. I quickly locked the door, grabbed my phone, and called her husband. "You won't believe this. Come here now," I whispered, my voice trembling. Within minutes, he arrived, and I let Rusty, my loyal and fearless golden retriever, leap straight into the jacuzzi. Chaos erupted instantly, splashing water, screaming, and a whirlwind of emotions I could hardly process. The scene was unbelievable, like something out of a movie. And yet, it was my reality. Rusty was everywhere, jumping, barking, and scratching, while my husband and the neighbor scrambled to regain some sense of dignity, or at least what was left of it. I stood there, frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of 40 years of trust and love shatter in seconds, but also sensing a spark inside me, the first flicker of courage, clarity, and the determination to take back control of my life. This was only the beginning, and what happened next would change everything. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading the comments and knowing where you are. Now let's understand how this story really began. I came home for lunch that Tuesday, expecting nothing more than a quiet break in my day. The sun had climbed high, warming the patio in that gentle way that always made me feel at peace. Rusty, my golden retriever, usually content to nap in the corner, was pacing restlessly, his paws scrabbling against the tiles. At first, I thought he was just eager for his walk, but then I noticed the low, anxious whine he gave whenever he glanced toward the sliding glass door. My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming that I couldn't ignore. I slid the door open and froze. There, in the jacuzzi, my husband Arthur was lounging with Linda, our neighbor, laughing as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Linda's hair glimmered in the sunlight, her hand resting on Arthur's arm in a familiarity that made my chest ache and my throat constrict. The scene was so absurd, so cruelly cinematic, that part of me wanted to turn away, to deny what my eyes were showing me. But Rusty's insistent barking and frantic pacing pulled me forward. He could sense my anger before I even allowed myself to fully acknowledge it. I locked the patio door behind me, my hands shaking, and quickly dialed Tom, Linda's husband. "You won't believe this. Come here now," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the heat of fury rising in me. Rusty, sensing the tension, pressed his body close to mine, his eyes wide, his tail rigid. It was as if he understood that this was not just about them, this was about the betrayal of everything I had built, every day of trust, every act of love. Within minutes, Tom arrived, his face pale with shock. Rusty, who had been circling, yipping in agitation, saw his cue and lunged. The 80-pound golden retriever leaped into the jacuzzi with a force that made the water roar and splash around like a storm. Arthur and Linda screamed, arms flailing, trying to shield themselves as Rusty barked joyously, completely oblivious to the humiliation he was causing. I could hear the slap of water against their skin, Linda's shrill cries, Arthur's frantic attempts to stay upright. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, a strange clarity settled over me. My anger wasn't wild or chaotic. It was deliberate, measured, a slow burn fueled by 40 years of devotion, now ignited by betrayal. I stepped closer to the edge, my heart hammering in my chest, watching Rusty spin and splash. He knocked over their drinks, sending them floating and overturned, their perfectly staged moment of intimacy collapsing like a house of cards. The sound of shattering glass mixed with their cries, creating a symphony of exposure that made me shiver with a mixture of satisfaction and grief. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I simply felt the cold truth of betrayal settle in my chest, a leaden weight that Rusty seemed to sense, nudging my hand with his wet nose as if to say, "You're not alone." Arthur finally managed to climb out, water dripping from his hair. Towel clutched desperately around his waist, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. There was no apology, no recognition of the pain he had inflicted, only the sneer that I had come to recognize as his armor. "You're going to regret embarrassing me, Rachel. You have no idea what you've just started," he said, his words curling around me like smoke, trying to suffocate the resolve that had begun to rise. I looked down at Rusty, who was now shaking water from his coat, droplets catching the sunlight like tiny diamonds. His gaze met mine, full of unspoken understanding, and I felt a flicker of hope amid the bitterness. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just watching betrayal, I was witnessing the beginning of reclaiming my life. 40 years of devotion had led to this instant of clarity. I could no longer let Arthur define me, control me, or diminish my existence. Rusty had reminded me of something essential, that loyalty, true loyalty, could be a lifeline in the storm of human deceit. And so, standing there, waterlogged and trembling with adrenaline, I made a silent vow. This betrayal would not break me. It would be the first step in my liberation. That evening, the house felt like a fragile, brittle thing. The kind of silence that presses down so heavily you can almost hear the weight of it on your shoulders. Arthur was supposedly asleep in the guest room, but I could feel his presence everywhere, in the way the air seemed charged, in the faint creak of the floorboards when he moved, in the shadows stretching along the walls like accusatory fingers. Rusty paced near my feet, low whines escaping his throat, ears flicking at every subtle sound. I could feel his unease, mirrored in my own, as if he too understood the insidious nature of what was coming. I found him in the kitchen, standing by the counter, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The soft light from the ceiling illuminated the smirk on his face, one I had once mistaken for charm, now revealing the cruelty beneath. The edges of the room seemed to close in, and for a fleeting moment I felt my stomach twist in fear and disbelief. How had it come to this, me, standing in my own kitchen, feeling like an intruder in my own life? I took a deep breath, steadied by Rusty's unwavering gaze, his warm presence anchoring me. My voice, though shaking slightly, came out firm. "Pack your bags, Arthur." He laughed, a low, calculating sound that made my chest ache. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, tilting his head, as if the audacity of my command were amusing to him. "This is my house, and soon you won't even remember you lived here." His words were meant to slice, to erode my sense of self, and for a moment I felt the cold brush of panic crawling up my spine. The familiarity of our home, once comforting, now felt alien, a stage on which my life was being rewritten without my consent. Arthur slammed a medical file on the counter, the thud echoing like a warning bell. The papers inside were arranged meticulously, neat and precise, a cruel mockery of professionalism. Assessments claimed I was becoming aggressive and forgetful, a narrative meticulously constructed to discredit me. "I've already spoken to Dr. Evans," he lied, his eyes glinting with certainty. "We're building a case for your competency, Rachel." The words were venom, designed to plant doubt and fear. My hands, which had once cooked meals, cleaned floors, and comforted him in times of sickness, now shook as I reached out to touch the edge of the counter, grounding myself against the dizzying swirl of anxiety. I felt a crack form in my confidence, a hairline fracture that threatened to spread. Was I forgetful? I had misplaced my keys last week, yes, but who didn't? The mundane slips of daily life suddenly seemed like evidence against me. The rational part of my mind wrestled with the fear, trying to remind me that this was manipulation, that Arthur's game was not a reflection of my reality. But the insidious whisper of self-doubt tugged at the edges of my resolve. Rusty nudged my hand with his wet nose, a small grounding reminder that I was not alone. I bent down, resting my forehead against his soft fur, drawing in his warmth and loyalty as a lifeline. His steady breathing against my cheek was a gentle affirmation. I could hold on to myself. I could fight back. I had to. I left the kitchen with Rusty padding silently beside me, each step heavy with dread yet fueled by determination. I went to the computer to check our joint bank account, my fingers trembling as I logged in, desperate to see if I could escape, even for a night, to regroup and gather my thoughts. The screen blinked and then flashed red. Access denied. Sufficient privileges. My heart sank, a suffocating weight pressing down, and I felt the sting of helplessness prick at my eyes. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, counting to 10, trying to summon the composure that Arthur was determined to strip away. Rusty circled back to my side, pressing against my leg as if to whisper courage. I realized then that this wasn't just about the bank account, or the files, or Arthur's schemes. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, about not allowing fear to dictate my life. Every subtle flicker of doubt he planted in me was an opportunity to confront my own strength, to remind myself that I was capable of seeing through the manipulation, capable of protecting what was mine. The room still felt tense, the shadows long, but for the first time that day, I felt the faintest spark of clarity, a small flame of resolve that refused to be extinguished. I looked down at Rusty, who met my gaze with unwavering loyalty, and I whispered, almost to myself, "We're going to get through this, aren't we, boy?" He nudged my hand again, tail wagging softly, and I felt a surge of hope. Arthur might have the files, the power, the narrative, but he didn't have this. He couldn't touch the bond we shared, the truth that lived in small, steadfast acts of love and courage. And that, I realized with sudden certainty, would be the beginning of reclaiming not just my home, but myself. I arrived at the lawyer's office the next morning feeling as though I had been dragged through a storm and left trembling on the other side. Sleep had eluded me completely. I had paced the house, tried to calm my racing thoughts. Yet each time I closed my eyes, the image of Arthur in the jacuzzi with Linda returned with cruel clarity. My hair felt tangled, my skin clammy, and my heart still thumped violently from the night's confrontation. Rusty had stayed close by, his head resting on my lap as I tried to ground myself. But even his loyal presence could not erase the heaviness pressing on my chest. The office smelled faintly of leather and polish, the kind of scent that should have been reassuring, but today it felt sterile, almost accusatory. The lawyer, an old friend of Arthur's, looked up as I entered. His expression was neutral at first, but the moment I mentioned Arthur, his features shifted into that subtle, practiced pity that I had come to recognize as complicity. He gestured for me to sit, his hands folded over a stack of papers, the weight of them more intimidating than the words he would speak. "Rachel," he began slowly, shaking his head, as if even the motion conveyed disappointment. "Arthur has power of attorney documents here, signed by you 3 years ago. They activate if you show signs of mental decline. He's freezing the assets for your protection." His words were soft, almost gentle, but every syllable landed like a hammer against my chest. I felt my stomach drop, a dizzying swirl of betrayal and disbelief overtaking me. My hands gripped the edges of the chair, knuckles whitening as I tried to process what he was telling me. "I never signed that," I burst out, my voice trembling not just with anger, but with the raw sting of incredulity. "I am perfectly sane. I have managed our home, our finances, my life. I am not like that." I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. A helplessness that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with the shock of realizing the extent of Arthur's manipulation. The lawyer's gaze softened, but in that softness was the unmistakable undertone of doubt. He clearly believed the narrative Arthur had built, that I was a confused, frail woman, losing control of her faculties. The pity in his eyes cut deeper than any accusation. I rose abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor, a harsh sound that echoed in the quiet office. Words failed me for a moment, leaving only the tremor of rage and despair in my chest. I stormed out, the door swinging shut behind me with a decisive thud. Rusty met me outside, his tail low but steady, and I felt a flicker of solace in his loyal presence. I slid into my car, gripping the steering wheel as my body shook. I screamed, a long, raw scream that tore from the depths of my throat, a sound meant not just to vent, but to reclaim a piece of myself lost in the swirl of deceit. The scream carried into the empty parking lot, mingling with the wind, and for a moment, I felt some small release, a thread of relief winding through the suffocating tension in my chest. It wasn't merely a divorce I was grappling with. It felt like a hostile takeover of my life. Every memory, every shared possession, every familiar corner of my world seemed tainted with the shadow of Arthur's deceit. I had loved him, cared for him, built decades of my life around a partnership I had trusted. Now it felt as though he had orchestrated a careful dismantling. A silent erasure of my identity, leaving me scrambling to find a foothold in a reality that had been manipulated without my consent. My hands still trembled as I started the car, my vision blurred from tears. Rusty rested his head on my lap, offering quiet comfort, and I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. As I drove home, each turn and stoplight felt heavy, every street familiar yet alien under the weight of betrayal. The silence in the car was both oppressive and comforting, punctuated only by Rusty's gentle breathing, which reminded me that I was not entirely alone, that some constants in my life remained untouchable, untarnished by deceit. Pulling into the driveway, I blinked against the sunlight, which now seemed harsher than before. My gaze fell upon the garage, and my breath caught in my throat. A for sale sign leaned casually against the wall, partially hidden behind a bush, as if someone had tried to be discreet, but failed. Their plans were already in motion. They had anticipated my reaction, had prepared the next stage of this invasion of my life. I felt a mixture of fury, grief, and disbelief, my heart tightening painfully. This home, which had been a sanctuary, a repository of decades of memories, was being treated as a commodity, a prize to be seized. Rusty nudged my hand with his nose again, grounding me in a small but vital way. I felt the heat of anger and determination coiling inside me, a readiness to fight not just for possessions or money, but for my dignity, my voice, my right to exist as myself in my own life. The betrayal had been cruel, but it had also illuminated something essential. I had not yet surrendered, not truly. I could reclaim my life, step by step, anchored by my courage and by the unwavering loyalty of my companion. I exhaled slowly, taking in the house, the driveway, the subtle hum of the suburban afternoon around me. There was grief here, certainly, but there was also clarity. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. I would rise, not in vengeance, but in the quiet, indomitable assertion of my truth. Rusty's eyes met mine, steady and unjudging, and I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that together we would navigate the storm ahead. The house could be threatened, the assets frozen, but my resolve, my sense of self, remained untouchable. The dog park was a sanctuary of sorts, neutral territory where the chaos of home could not touch me. Rusty bounded ahead as soon as we arrived, ears flopping, tail a golden blur of excitement. He darted between other dogs, leaping and twisting, completely immersed in the joy of the moment. And for a brief second, I allowed myself to smile, to feel the lightness that came from watching him run free. The grass smelled sweet, slightly damp from morning dew, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and leaves, a calm I desperately needed. I scanned the benches lining the perimeter, and my eyes fell on Tom, sitting alone. His posture was slouched, shoulders heavy with something I could feel even from a distance. The man who had once been a quiet presence in the neighborhood now looked broken, as if life had drained the color from him. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, but needing the connection, the shared understanding that we were both caught in the aftermath of betrayal. He looked up as I neared, his eyes momentarily lighting with recognition, but then clouding with the weight of his own guilt and fear. I sat beside him, careful to give him space, yet close enough to let my presence reassure him. "They're trying to say I'm crazy, Tom," I said quietly, my voice tinged with both disbelief and fatigue. I kept my hands folded in my lap, fingers twitching with tension, trying to anchor myself. "They're trying to make everyone believe that I'm losing my mind, that I'm incapable of handling my own life." I could feel the tremor in my voice, a raw vulnerability that I did not hide from him. This was not just anger. It was grief, shock, and the deep ache of realization that those I had trusted were willing to rewrite the story of my life. Tom let out a heavy sigh, his gaze drifting toward the ground. "It's Linda's specialty," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "She's a paralegal. She did this to her first husband to get his pension." They gaslight the spouse until they snap, and then use the outburst as proof of instability. It's methodical, cruel, and precise. They know exactly how to push until the line is crossed, and then they present it as justification. His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, a revelation that made my blood run cold. I had sensed manipulation, but hearing it articulated with such clarity transformed fear into something else. Outrage, a growing fire of determination that began to replace the panic knotting my chest. I stared at him, my hands tightening into fists in my lap. Rage surged through me, fierce and illuminating, pushing aside the lingering fear that had clung to me since that morning. "They are not taking my dignity," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate. I felt the power of my own conviction coursing through me, like a river breaking through a dam. "I need proof, Tom, not just for them, but for myself. I need to show that I am not what they say I am." There was no hesitation, no doubt, just the raw, unfiltered resolve to reclaim my life, to assert my truth in the face of deceit. Tom glanced around nervously, eyes flicking to the edges of the park, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment to eavesdrop. "I managed to clone Linda's laptop drive before she changed her passwords," he said, his voice low, tense. "I haven't looked at it yet. I'm too scared of what I'll find. But you should take it." He extended his hand, holding a small silver USB drive. The metal glinted in the sunlight, deceptively ordinary in appearance. Yet to me, it felt like a key, a tangible symbol of hope, of truth waiting to be uncovered. My heart quickened as I took it from him, fingers brushing against his in a moment of shared understanding, an unspoken bond forming in the quiet between us. I held the drive close, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. Rusty trotted back toward me, wagging his tail, his eyes gleaming with awareness that something significant had shifted. He nudged my hand with his wet nose, grounding me once more, reminding me that I was not alone, that loyalty and love could be stronger than fear. I felt a flicker of courage ignite, a sense of clarity that had been absent in the haze of betrayal and manipulation. This drive, small and unassuming, represented more than data. It represented a chance to reclaim what had been stolen, to confront lies with undeniable truth. We sat in silence for a few moments, the quiet only broken by Rusty's occasional bark or the distant laughter of other park-goers. I could feel the weight of the upcoming challenge pressing against me, but it no longer felt insurmountable. With Tom's hesitant trust and Rusty's unwavering presence, I realized that the path forward, though fraught with uncertainty, was mine to walk. I could face the deceit, the manipulation, the calculated cruelty, and emerge with my dignity intact. The thought brought a strange warmth to my chest, a delicate mix of hope and determination that steadied me. As I slid the USB drive into my pocket, the metal cold against my skin, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth, piece by piece, and I would not let fear dictate my actions. I would reclaim my voice, my home, and my life. The betrayal had been bitter, the manipulation sharp, but it had also revealed something essential. Strength can be found in unlikely alliances, and courage often arises when fear threatens to overwhelm. I looked at Tom, whose own expression had softened slightly, and I nodded. A quiet acknowledgement that together we would confront the darkness ahead. Rusty rested his head on my lap, eyes shining, and I realized that this small, loyal companion had become not just a source of comfort, but a symbol of resilience and unwavering support. The house was swallowed by darkness when I crept into the study, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the blinds. Every familiar corner seemed charged, as if the shadows themselves were whispering secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. Rusty padded quietly beside me, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood, ears perked, tail low and steady. He sensed the tension radiating off me, a silent acknowledgement that something crucial was about to unfold. My hands trembled slightly, a mixture of anticipation and dread, as I reached for the silver USB drive Tom had entrusted me with. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted with possibility, truth, and the promise of vindication. I slid the drive into the laptop, the click of the port echoing in the hushed room. My breath caught, and I hesitated for just a heartbeat, imagining what I might find, fearing what I already knew deep down. The cursor blinked at me, indifferent, until I found a folder labeled Practice. It seemed innocuous, deliberately nondescript. Yet I felt a shiver run through me, a sense that something monumental lay inside. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment before clicking, and the screen flickered to life. The video began, and immediately I recognized the office, my study. The very desk where I had signed countless checks, balanced bills, and organized our lives. But this scene was wrong. The camera angle was slightly askew, the lighting harsh and deliberate. And there he was, Arthur sitting at my desk, a stack of old checks spread out before him like a puzzle he was determined to solve. He had no idea the little red light of the webcam was on, and the image recorded everything, unfiltered, unforgiving. My chest tightened as I watched him lean over a light pad, tracing my signature again and again, the pen sliding across the paper with meticulous care. His lips moved, muttering instructions to himself. Loop the R, keep it shaky. Make it look like she's losing motor control, I heard him whisper, low and insidious, the words crawling under my skin. My heart thumped so violently I was sure it would betray my presence in the room. I could feel a wave of nausea, mingling with disbelief, fury, and a heartbreaking sense of betrayal. Every fiber of my being recoiled at the realization, the man I had shared 40 years of my life with, the one I had trusted implicitly, had been plotting to destroy my autonomy, to steal from me while painting me as incompetent. I covered my mouth with one hand, desperate to stifle the gasp that clawed its way out of my throat. My eyes blurred with tears that I refused to let fall, not wanting to lose the clarity of focus that had brought me here. This video, this irrefutable proof, was more than evidence. It was a revelation of his intent, a crystallization of every suspicion I had felt but had struggled to articulate. I felt the cold, hard line of determination set in my jaw. I would not let this stand. I would not allow his deception to rewrite the story of my life any longer. Rusty moved closer, pressing his warm body against my leg, sensing the storm of emotions within me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, allowing the grounding weight of his presence to center me. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the laptop, and in that stillness, I felt a surge of strength. Every sleepless night, every pang of doubt Arthur had forced me to endure, every whispered insult and manipulated conversation had led me to this moment. I could confront the truth now, face it head on, and wield it not as a weapon of revenge, but as a shield of justice. Then, as if the universe itself had decided to remind me of the fragility of this victory, I heard the floorboards creak outside the study door. My pulse leapt into my throat, a jolt of fear coursing through me. Rusty's low, guttural woof vibrated against my leg, his warning instinct sharp and immediate. The doorknob began to turn slowly, deliberately, each twist echoing in the quiet room like a sinister drumbeat. I froze, body taut, every muscle coiled, every sense straining for the next sound, the next movement. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with anticipation, each heartbeat stretching into an eternity. My mind raced, flipping through every possible scenario, each darker than the last, yet beneath the fear was a thread of exhilaration. This was it, the confrontation I had unknowingly prepared for, the moment where all the lies would meet the undeniable proof. Rusty's eyes met mine, dark and unwavering, and in them I saw courage mirrored back at me. I was not powerless. I was not alone. Together, we had reached the threshold where truth would no longer be hidden, where deception could be exposed in the stark, undeniable light of reality. I took a slow, measured breath, forcing my racing heart to find a rhythm, and placed a hand firmly on Rusty's back. The video continued to play, Arthur's every meticulous move illuminated, every muttered instruction a testament to his malice. My chest tightened, not with fear now, but with resolve. I would act. I would reclaim what was mine. And in that charged silence, as the knob turned and Rusty growled low in warning, I understood something profound. Sometimes, the worst betrayal can be the catalyst that awakens the strongest courage, and the smallest, most loyal companion can become the anchor that steadies you when the ground beneath seems to give way. The morning light seeped through the kitchen blinds, painting stripes across the tile floor, but it did nothing to brighten the heavy weight pressing on my chest. Rusty padded beside me, his tail wagging hesitantly as if he too could feel the tension coiled in the air. I crouched for a moment, gently slipping the silver USB drive into the small pouch I had sewn into his collar months ago for walks, a precaution that now felt like a stroke of providence. The cool metal pressed against Rusty's fur, almost imperceptible. But it made me feel like we had a secret weapon tucked away in plain sight. He sniffed at my hand, sensing the gravity of the morning, his eyes steady and unwavering. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the tremor in my hands and the jitter in my stomach. Today, I would have to become the person Arthur wanted me to be. The fragile, forgetful woman he could manipulate with a word or a glance. It was a role I despised, a mask I had no desire to wear, but the stakes were too high for me to show my hand. I had proof now, undeniable and irrefutable. Yet it was useless unless I could maneuver him into a position where his own arrogance would betray him further. I had to appear weak to expose his cruelty, cunning to reveal his deceit. The thought made my stomach knot, but I reminded myself that I had Rusty by my side, and together we were more capable than he could ever imagine. I shuffled into the kitchen, allowing my movements to be slow and hesitant, deliberately uncoordinated, my shoulders slumped and my head drooping slightly. "Arthur, did we have breakfast already?" My voice carried the soft, uncertain tone he expected, a perfect imitation of the frail woman he believed I was becoming. My chest burned as I spoke the words, each one a lie I had to swallow to set the stage. I saw the smirk spread across his face, the satisfaction in his eyes as he realized his plan appeared to be working. "Yes, dear," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "You forgot again. Go sit down." The casual cruelty in his voice was designed to sting, to remind me of my supposed incompetence, and yet, beneath the sting, a surge of rage flickered, subtle but potent. I obeyed, lowering myself into the chair, carefully folding my hands in my lap, careful not to betray the storm of defiance bubbling just beneath the surface. Rusty, sensing the tension, circled the table before settling down quietly at my feet, his presence a comforting anchor against the tide of manipulation. While Arthur busied himself with the coffee pot, pouring himself a drink with an air of triumph, I felt Rusty's movements shift. At first, it was subtle, a paw tapping against the floor, but soon he began scratching frantically at the loose floorboard under the pantry, a spot we had used years ago to hide spare keys and small items. His urgency was almost desperate, eyes darting to me as if urging me to pay attention. Arthur turned, irritated by the noise, and kicked at him with a harsh, careless motion. "Stupid dog!" he barked, the words sharp, but Rusty did not flinch from his task. His persistence was steady, methodical, as if guided by instinct rather than chance. I rose slowly, keeping my demeanor calm, pretending not to notice, and knelt beside Rusty, placing a soothing hand on his back. "Good boy, Rusty," I murmured, letting my voice carry a warmth that belied the tension, gently stroking him, while my other hand explored the edges of the floorboard. There it was, a small notebook tucked deep into the crevice. Almost hidden, but for Rusty's unerring nose that had traced Arthur's scent to it. My fingers closed over the notebook, and I felt a shiver of triumph mixed with anxiety. Every page promised answers, each line potentially exposing the depths of Arthur's deceit. I slid the notebook carefully into my pocket, keeping my movements slow and deliberate to avoid drawing attention. Rusty's eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement of our shared victory, and I felt a swell of gratitude for his unwavering intuition. My pulse raced as I imagined the contents, the secrets that had been so meticulously hidden from me, now within my grasp. I led Rusty away from the pantry, guiding him back to a more neutral position by the table. As if nothing unusual had occurred, Arthur glanced up occasionally, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but he dismissed it, convinced of his victory. He could not see the storm that had just begun to brew. I retreated to the bathroom, shutting the door gently behind me. The room was small, the light harsh against the pale walls, yet it provided a private space to process the discovery. My hands shook as I opened the notebook, a mixture of dread and anticipation rippling through me. The pages were filled with neat, deliberate handwriting, numbers, and annotations that chronicled a series of transactions, each more incriminating than the last. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it wasn't just casual notes or mundane records, it was a ledger of offshore accounts, hidden from view, detailing wealth siphoned away under the guise of normalcy. The magnitude of his deception struck me, a mix of awe at his audacity and righteous fury at the betrayal. I sank onto the edge of the bathtub, clutching the notebook to my chest, feeling the weight of truth settle heavily but powerfully in my hands. Rusty nudged the edge of the door with his nose, reminding me that he was still there, steadfast and loyal, a constant in a world that had become unrecognizable. I exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline ebb just enough for clarity to emerge. This was the evidence I had needed, the tangible proof that could turn the tide. Every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every pang of doubt that Arthur had tried to cultivate had led me here. And now I held the power to reclaim my life. The betrayal had been calculated, cruel, and precise, yet the path to redemption and justice was unfolding before me. Rusty rested his head on my knee, eyes steady and unwavering, and I realized that our small, loyal alliance had become an unbreakable force. With the USB drive safely hidden and this ledger in my hands, the pieces were falling into place. I would confront the deception, piece by piece, not with haste or anger alone, but with strategy, resilience, and undeniable truth. The morning sun rose higher, spilling light into the room, and with it came the first true sense of hope I had felt since the betrayal began. Today, the setup was complete, and soon, the reckoning would follow. The backyard had always been my sanctuary, a place where the world slowed down and the chaos of life felt distant. The soil under my fingernails, the scent of earth mingling with the faint perfume of blooming roses, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, it all grounded me, brought clarity to my swirling thoughts. Rusty padded beside me, tail wagging lazily, occasionally sniffing at a stray butterfly that flitted near the marigolds. Even in these quiet moments, I couldn't escape the weight pressing against me, the lingering fear and anger that clung to my every move. The ledger I had found yesterday sat open on the small table beside the patio chair, its pages heavy with secrets and deceit. My eyes traced the entries over and over, searching for patterns, connections, anything that might give me leverage. A phone number appeared repeatedly, marked with confirmations beside each entry. My stomach tightened as realization struck. Arthur had a second phone. He kept it hidden, tucked away in his golf bag, a device dedicated entirely to his schemes. My mind raced, heart hammering with both fear and anticipation. This was it, the key to their next move, the proof of their ongoing conspiracy. I could see their arrogance so clearly now, their confidence that no one would ever discover the truth. Every cruel plan, every whispered insult, every calculated manipulation had been meticulously designed, and yet they had underestimated me. I waited until the sound of running water reached me from inside the house. Arthur was in the shower, unaware of the storm that was gathering just beyond his door. I slid to my feet, feeling Rusty brush against my leg as if offering his silent support. The garage door loomed ahead, the space cluttered with tools and forgotten boxes, shadows stretching across the concrete floor. My breath caught as I approached, each step deliberate, careful, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the golf bag. My heart pounded, a relentless drumbeat echoing in my ears, and yet, beneath the fear, there was a thread of exhilaration. I was about to uncover another piece of the puzzle, another testament to their cruelty. The bag was heavier than I expected. A subtle resistance as I unzipped the compartment. There it was, a sleek, unassuming burner phone, the kind that could be easily overlooked, but in my hands, it was a weapon. I cradled it gently, aware of how fragile the moment felt, how easily it could be disrupted. Rusty nudged my side with his nose, a reminder that I was not alone, that loyalty and instinct were on my side. I crouched to examine the screen, sliding through messages, each one like a dagger twisting in my chest. The texts were brutal, cold, and meticulously cruel. Linda, is the old hag gone yet? My fingers shook as I read it, the word hag cutting deeper than I could have imagined. Arthur, soon. The retirement home paperwork is ready for the block party announcement. My stomach turned at the thought, at their callous intention to humiliate me publicly, to reinforce their narrative of my supposed instability. The plan was audacious, calculated, and deeply personal. They weren't just stealing my assets, they were orchestrating a public spectacle to break my spirit. I sank to the garage floor, Rusty curling beside me, his warmth a comforting anchor in the storm of emotions. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, a tidal wave of fury, grief, and disbelief. But beneath it was something else. Clarity. This was their plan, laid bare in black and white, and now it was mine to disrupt. Every cruel whisper, every manipulative act had led to this exact moment. I felt the adrenaline surge, intertwining with a sense of righteous purpose that steadied my trembling hands. I whispered under my breath, a quiet, defiant promise. Okay, Arthur, you want a show? I'll give you a show. The words were almost foreign to me, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, but they carried a weight of resolve I hadn't known I possessed. Rusty nudged the phone gently with his nose, his eyes meeting mine, filled with the unwavering trust that had carried me through every fear and every doubt. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was affirmation that I could do this, that I was not powerless. I envisioned tomorrow, the neighborhood barbecue bustling with unsuspecting neighbors. Laughter and chatter filling the warm air, while behind it all, Arthur and Linda planned to humiliate me. But now, I had the power to rewrite the narrative, to transform their intended spectacle into the moment of their undoing. My heart steadied, each beat sinking with a newfound determination, a sense of strategic patience. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming my dignity and exposing the truth for everyone to see. I took a deep, shuddering breath, letting it fill my lungs and steady the storm inside. Rusty's head rested against my knee, his fur soft and grounding, and I realized something profound. The fear, the betrayal, the humiliation I had endured was a crucible that had forged resilience, clarity, and courage within me. Every step I had taken, from the discovery of the ledger to the secretive infiltration of the garage, had been leading to this point. And now, with the burner phone in hand, the ledger in my pocket, and Rusty by my side, I felt an unshakable certainty. I would confront the deception, piece by piece, and I would not falter. The morning sun climbed higher, spilling light across the garden, highlighting the vibrant greens and warm browns of my sanctuary. And in that light, amidst the roses and the freshly turned soil, I allowed a small, private smile. The plan was set. The truth was in my hands. And tomorrow, at the heart of the neighborhood, the spectacle they had intended to humiliate me would instead become the moment of their reckoning. Rusty's tail wagged lightly, nudging my side, and I whispered once more, this time with quiet certainty. Let's do this, boy. Let's show them who we really are. The cul-de-sac buzzed with life, laughter spilling from open windows, children darting between houses, and the faint smell of grilled meats and baked goods mingling in the warm air. Balloons swayed gently in the breeze, their bright colors almost mocking the storm of nerves and anger swirling inside me. Tables were laden with homemade dishes and store-bought treats. Neighbors chatting in clusters, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. I walked slowly, Rusty at my side, tail low but steady, his presence grounding me, reminding me that I was not alone in this. Every step felt heavy, weighted with anticipation, yet each breath I took carried with it a sense of purpose. Today, the humiliation they had planned would turn into revelation, and the truth would finally shine. Arthur had insisted on dressing me for the occasion, his idea of subtle cruelty. He had chosen a beige cardigan, soft and neutral, as though he could blend me into the background, strip away my presence until I became a pale shadow of myself. I allowed it, letting the fabric drape loosely around my shoulders, the color washing me out. It was a calculated act of submission, one that would make the contrast of my eventual triumph all the more striking. Rusty's fur brushed against my leg, his warmth a silent reassurance that I was more than the role I was pretending to play. He had been my confidant, my protector, and today he was my ally in turning this staged moment into my reckoning. The neighbors' faces reflected curiosity, sympathy, and polite concern. Some had nodded at me as I passed, whispers trailing behind like tendrils of gossip. Their eyes were kind, but I could sense the doubt they had been conditioned to believe Arthur's careful narrative had done its work. And yet, I felt no shame. I allowed the facade of frailty to settle around me, but beneath it, a simmering fire burned, fueled by indignation, betrayal, and the desire for justice. Every laugh, every greeting, every small gesture from them became a battleground, a place where I could reclaim the dignity they were meant to strip away. Arthur raised his glass, the clinking sound slicing through the chatter and signaling the beginning of the performance he had orchestrated. He cleared his throat, eyes sweeping the crowd as if to measure their empathy, their reactions. "Friends," he began, voice somber, deliberate. "It breaks my heart to say this, but Rachel is no longer able to care for herself. We've made the hard decision to move her to a facility." His words were measured, calculated to elicit gasps, murmurs of concern, a collective sense of pity aimed directly at me. I could feel my chest tighten, the weight of their intended judgment pressing down. But I held on to Rusty's leash like a lifeline, feeling the familiar strength of his steady presence. My throat felt raw, my hands trembled, but I forced myself to stand, letting the full measure of my being extend upward as I straightened my spine. The cardigan felt heavier suddenly, not as a symbol of submission, but as a shield, a reminder of the role I had played to set this moment in motion. I inhaled deeply, the scent of fresh grass and summer air filling my lungs, and I let my voice emerge, clear, strong, and unwavering. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, each word deliberate, carrying over the hum of conversation. But before I go, I wanted to share a special memory video I prepared for everyone. The words were simple, almost casual, yet they carried a weight that made the air shift. The crowd's attention wavered, curiosity flickering in their eyes, and Arthur's smug expression faltered slightly. He had expected tears, confusion, perhaps a whispered apology, not defiance and control. He glanced at me, brows furrowing, the practiced confidence that had carried him through weeks of manipulation faltering under the subtle authority in my stance. His hand hesitated over the glass of wine, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. He watched as I reached for the remote, the small device in my hand now a symbol of agency, of reclaimed power. He had assumed the video was a farewell montage, a sentimental collection of memories meant to soften the blow, to mask the humiliation with gentle sadness. He did not see the strategy, the careful orchestration that had led to this moment. I pointed the remote at the giant projection screen set up on the lawn, the crowd shifting slightly as they noticed, sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. Rusty sat obediently beside me, eyes alert, ears twitching at the faintest sound of movement. His presence a grounding force as I prepared to flip the narrative that had been so meticulously constructed against me. I could feel the collective gaze of neighbors, their curiosity blending with apprehension, their whispers weaving a tapestry of tension across the festive scene. And then, as I pressed the button and the screen flickered to life, the first images appeared, a montage that was anything but sentimental. The camera focused, unflinching, on Arthur in the act of deception, each frame capturing the meticulous traces of his betrayal. The crowd leaned in, whispers turning into gasps, the realization spreading like wildfire across familiar faces. I felt Rusty shift at my side, the warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart reinforcing the truth that I carried, the undeniable evidence of their calculated malice. I could see Arthur's eyes widen, confusion and alarm mingling in a fleeting expression of disbelief. The plan he had so carefully crafted, the humiliation he had intended to orchestrate, was unraveling before him. I allowed myself a quiet smile, a breath of satisfaction tempered with the grace of justice. This was not merely a victory over deceit. It was a reclamation of dignity, a public affirmation that truth could not be hidden behind arrogance and manipulation. Rusty's tail brushed against my leg, his steady presence reminding me that even in the midst of betrayal and fear, loyalty, courage, and love could guide the course of action toward resolution. The first step of the reckoning was complete, and as the images continued to play, reflecting the depth of Arthur's betrayal, I felt a sense of catharsis settle over me, a mixture of sorrow, vindication, and the quiet joy of reclaiming the life that had been threatened for so long. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, the familiar hum of neighbors chatting, the distant laughter of children, and the warm aroma of food seemed to fade into a taut silence. I felt Rusty shift at my side, his paw brushing against mine, a grounding reminder that I was not alone. This was no sentimental slideshow of our years together, no carefully curated montage meant to soften the blow or evoke sympathy. This was something far sharper, far more deliberate. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a mix of anticipation and fear threading through my veins. But beneath it all, there was the quiet pulse of righteous determination. The first frames appeared, projected in high definition across the white screen on the lawn, catching the light of the late afternoon sun. Arthur's hands moved over the desk, deliberate and precise, tracing over checks with my signature, over and over again. The glow of the light pad reflected in his glasses as he muttered, almost gleefully, "Loop the R, keep it shaky, make it look like she's losing motor control." I caught my breath, my hands instinctively gripping Rusty's leash, and he leaned into me, sensing the tension in the air, his body a comforting anchor. The audio, raw and unfiltered, boomed across the quiet street, carrying every word, every laugh, every act of betrayal straight to the ears of the neighbors who had believed Arthur's narrative for far too long. "She's so trusting, it's pathetic," the digital recording of Arthur sneered. The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the cheerful chatter of the block party that now seemed frozen in time. I could feel the collective shock of the crowd ripple through the cul-de-sac, a wave of disbelief washing over familiar faces. Gasps, whispered exclamations, and the sudden shift in body language betrayed the neighbors' dawning understanding. They were seeing what I had seen only in fragments, the truth of the betrayal I had endured so intimately and privately. Then came the moment I had anticipated. Linda. She had been hovering near Arthur, her own eyes wide with disbelief, and she tried to dash toward the projector, as if she could somehow erase the evidence or assert control over the situation. But Rusty stepped forward, a low, resonant growl rolling from deep in his chest. His stance was firm, protective, unwavering. I watched as Linda hesitated, her confidence faltering under his fierce gaze. My loyal companion was more than just a pet. He was a guardian of the truth, and he would not let deceit run unchecked on this day. I inhaled deeply, feeling the tension in my chest ebb slightly as I let my voice carry across the gathering. It was steady, calm, and yet it held the weight of all the injustice, the betrayal, and the quiet fury that had been simmering inside me for weeks. "I am not sick," I said, letting the words settle over the stunned crowd. "I am not crazy. I am just a woman who trusted the wrong man." I paused, letting the silence deepen the impact, my eyes locking onto Arthur, whose face had turned pale. Lips pressed into a thin line, the arrogance that had carried him through his schemes now stripped bare. "And you?" I said, my voice rising slightly, resonating with clarity and authority. "You? You're evicted." The words struck like a bell, clear and unyielding, cutting through the hum of whispered speculation. I could feel Rusty's warmth at my side, his body pressing against my leg, an anchor to reality and courage. The neighbors were looking at me differently now, not with pity, not with doubt, but with respect, recognition, and a quiet awe at the resilience and clarity that had brought this moment into being. Arthur's eyes darted around, desperate for an escape, a way to rewrite the scene, but there was none. Every neighbor, every friend, every casual acquaintance who had been swayed by his manipulation was now witness to the irrefutable proof of his deceit. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him, and he could not spin a story or hide behind charm or manipulation. His empire of lies was crumbling, and I stood firm, the calm eye in the storm, holding the truth like a shield in front of me. And then it came, the sound I had been waiting for, orchestrated perfectly by Tom. The wail of police sirens cut through the air, weaving with the murmur of realization spreading through the crowd. Blue and red lights flashed across the driveway, reflecting off the balloons and the whitewashed walls of the neighborhood homes. I felt a surge of relief, a release of tension that had been coiled tightly inside me for weeks. The culmination of planning, courage, and unwavering persistence had reached its moment of manifestation. Tom had done his part flawlessly, coordinating with authorities to ensure that the law would enforce what the truth demanded. I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, letting it carry away the fear, the anxiety, and the lingering doubt that had accompanied me through this ordeal. Rusty nudged my hand, and I bent down to stroke his head, feeling the silky fur beneath my fingers, letting the tactile comfort ground me in the reality of the moment. Around me, the neighbors were murmuring, exchanging glances, some nodding silently, others wiping tears from their eyes. Their expressions spoke volumes: recognition, validation, and a newfound understanding that appearances could be deceiving, that strength and integrity often lie hidden behind humility and kindness. I allowed myself a small smile, one of quiet satisfaction and enduring strength, as I looked around at the faces of those who had been witness to my vindication. Today was not about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming dignity, about demonstrating that truth could withstand manipulation, fear, and deceit. Rusty sat proudly beside me, tail wagging gently, and I felt the warmth of his presence fill the remaining gaps of fear and uncertainty. Arthur's face remained rigid, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and impotent anger. There was no explanation, no excuse, no charm he could wield to salvage the narrative. The weight of his actions pressed down upon him, undeniable and irrevocable. I had been patient, meticulous, and strategic, and the result was clear for everyone to see: the triumph of truth over deceit, of courage over manipulation. As I watched the unfolding scene, a profound sense of catharsis washed over me. The long weeks of fear, doubt, and betrayal had led to this moment. I had been tested, challenged, and pushed to the brink, yet I had endured, and now I had risen above it. Rusty leaned against me, and together we stood as witnesses to justice, guardians of dignity, and living proof that even in the face of calculated cruelty, integrity and resilience could prevail. The flashing blue lights of the police cars painted the quiet cul-de-sac in alternating streaks of cold and urgent color. Slicing through the soft warmth of the evening sun, I felt Rusty press against my leg, his body calm yet alert, sensing the shift in energy as officers moved with deliberate precision around Arthur. Every step they took, every command they spoke, felt surreal, like the culmination of a dream I had barely allowed myself to imagine. And yet, here it was, the tangible, undeniable reality of justice. Arthur's face was a mask of disbelief and frustration. The arrogance that had carried him through years of manipulation now stripped away, revealing a vulnerability he had never allowed anyone to witness. As they cuffed his hands behind his back, I noticed his eyes flicker toward me, a silent plea for recognition of the weak woman he believed I was. But I was not her. I had endured the humiliation, the gaslighting, the betrayal, and I had risen. My spine was straight, my chin lifted, and the fire that had fueled every careful step toward this moment still burned steadily within me. Rusty nuzzled my hand, grounding me, reminding me of the loyalty, love, and resilience that had carried me here. The officers guided Arthur toward the car, each movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. The gravity of his actions etched in every gesture. He struggled slightly, a futile attempt to regain control, but the weight of the law, of truth, and of undeniable evidence kept him in check. I watched, steady, feeling a complex tangle of emotions, a flicker of pity, a surge of relief, and a quiet satisfaction. He had believed he could define me, manipulate me, erase my voice, and yet here I was, standing tall, fully myself, my dignity intact, my life reclaimed. Neighbors gathered around cautiously, their expressions a mix of awe, embarrassment, and tentative relief. Faces I had known for years, some friends, some acquaintances, now looked at me with renewed understanding. "Rachel," one woman said softly, her voice tinged with remorse, we didn't know." Another nodded, shame evident in the downcast angle of her head. "We believed him," a man muttered almost to himself. I felt a surge of empathy, recognizing that they had been victims of manipulation too, caught in the web Arthur and Linda had spun so expertly. I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs, and I smiled gently. "It's okay," I said, voice soft but certain. "I understand. You were misled. You were part of the story, but now you see the truth." The words seemed to lift a weight from the air. A few neighbors nodded, some wiping at their eyes, others reaching out to shake my hand. Forgiveness flowed through me like a gentle tide, not because Arthur had earned it, but because I had earned the right to peace. And I refused to let bitterness define the ending of this chapter. Weeks passed, and life began to reclaim its natural rhythm. I woke each morning with a sense of calm, my steps lighter, my thoughts clearer. Rusty and I moved through the house as if it were a new home, though it was the one I had known and loved for decades. The silence was profound, not lonely, but restorative. A peaceful stillness that allowed me to reflect, to breathe, and to heal. I found joy in the ordinary again. The aroma of coffee brewing, the soft rustle of leaves in the backyard, Rusty's happy bark when I tossed a ball across the lawn. I often sat on my patio, a cup of tea in hand, feeling the warmth of the sun against my skin. The house was mine, in every sense. The empty jacuzzi gleamed quietly, a reminder of the moment when my life had changed irrevocably. It had been the stage for betrayal, humiliation, and shock, but it had also been the place where clarity struck, where courage was summoned, and where a small, loyal dog helped me reclaim what was rightfully mine. Rusty lay at my feet, dreaming softly, legs twitching as if running through invisible fields, and I traced his fur absent-mindedly, grateful for the constancy of his presence through the storm. In the quiet moments, I let myself remember the fear, the uncertainty, and the anger that had consumed me. I recalled the nights spent questioning my memory, my judgment, and my strength, and I marveled at the resilience that had carried me through. It was not a resilience born of denial, but one nurtured through attention to truth, careful observation, and the unwavering companionship of a creature who understood me in ways humans often could not. I had been tested, tried, and forced to confront the worst that another could inflict, and yet here I sat, alive, unbroken, and more whole than ever before. The house, once a backdrop for betrayal, had become a sanctuary. Each room, each corner, was imbued with memories of fear overcome, strategies executed, and justice served. I looked at the living room, imagining the scene of revelation replayed in my mind, the neighbors' gasps, the flicker of realization across Arthur's face, Rusty standing resolute by my side. Even now, the image brought a sense of quiet triumph, a reminder that courage, when measured and patient, could transform despair into liberation. I sipped my tea slowly, feeling the warmth seep into my chest, and smiled, letting the sunlight dance across the patio. The betrayal I had endured no longer defined me. Instead, it had become the catalyst for freedom, clarity, and a deeper appreciation for the resilience within myself. I glanced at the empty jacuzzi once more, the memories of chaos, shock, and revelation mingling with a serene sense of peace. I had survived the storm, and in doing so, I had reclaimed not only my home, but also my sense of self, my dignity, and my belief in the possibility of justice. Sometimes, the worst betrayals lead to the most profound freedoms. I had learned that strength often manifests quietly, that courage can be measured in moments of patience and observation, and that love, in its truest form, is sometimes found in the loyalty of a small, scruffy companion who never wavers. Rusty stirred slightly, and I reached down to run my hand through his fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Life was finally ours again, unencumbered and full of possibility. And as I settled back in my chair, letting the warm light wash over me, I whispered softly to the breeze, to the house, and to the universe itself. Sometimes, the darkest moments can reveal the brightest paths, and even in the aftermath of betrayal, peace, justice, and renewal are possible. If you enjoyed following my story and the journey to reclaiming justice, resilience, and freedom, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to witness more stories of courage, truth, and the power of standing tall even when the world tries to knock you down.